Hello, this is Jordan and Indy here, and this podcast is brought to you by Yes He Is. We're friends, chatting with some friends and some incredible people that are sharing their faith in their everyday life.
This next conversation is with Bonte Uwimana, who shares these incredible stories of how she is setting up dinner parties, in-person gatherings, events, just to be able to share Jesus with the people in her life. We really hope you enjoy this conversation.
I'm really keen for this first question.
I do have a question for both of you girls. Okay. What is girl dinner? I hear about it all the time. Can you please try and explain
girl dinner
to the best of your ability what it actually is?
It's like cereal, isn't it? It's like
a little picky dinner, cute. It's not a big, substantial meal. It's like a couple picky things. Yeah, cereal.
Pasta and butter.
Yeah.
That vibe.
Yeah.
You've only got like 5 minutes to make dinner and then...
My girl dinner is a crisp with a bit of cheese on it and a little bit of pickle, like just that's one dinner. Bite. I'd have a few of those. But.
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say one crisp. Who does that?
Yeah.
That's good. My girl dinner is like, this is going to sound so grim. It's like a warm mayo sandwich.
Wow.
Judge me all you want. Judge me all you want.
Wait, define what's warm, the mayo or the sandwich?
No, the egg's warm. So it's like you've just...
Egg
mayo.
Egg mayo.
Oh, did I not say that?
You just said warm mayo sandwich. I was like, I'm open to it.
Yeah, like a warm egg mayo sandwich. It's the vibe.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a great first question. Thanks.
Wow, thank you. Well, Bonte, it's an absolute joy to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here.
The reason it's a joy is because, firstly, you're an incredibly fun human, but you also have such a compelling story. And you're 24 years old. It feels like you've lived multiple lifetimes in one lifetime. And so I am really excited for us to kind of dive into your story, hear a little bit about who you are. But I'd love for you to kind of give us a little bit of an origin story. And so what is the story of Bonte Uwimana? Because you're not from London. And actually, I feel like this story traces back. And so tell us, what is the origin story?
So I am half Rwandese, half Scottish. My mum is from Edinburgh. My dad is from Kigali in Rwanda. And they met in the 90s in Rwanda and in Burundi after the genocide. I lived there with them for a couple of years till I was 3 and then moved to Perth in Scotland. My dad had a very radical story, life, like grew up in Rwanda, on the streets, in gangs, like heavily into drugs.
Wow.
Didn't know Jesus, really broken family, had a incredible encounter with Jesus when he was my age, like 24, 25. His life was changed, transformed forever. And a couple of years after he met Jesus, he met my mum, and they lived and worked together in Rwanda, living life alongside and mentoring and creating family for orphans of the genocide. And then a couple of years later, they moved to Perth and back home for my mum. I lived there, and then my 2 sisters were born, and my 2 younger sisters, and we grew up there.
Can we, but I just recently heard your how your parents met.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
please, can you share that story? Because it is so good.
So yeah, as I was saying, my dad had this incredible like life, death to life story. People were scared of him growing up. He was in this horrible gang, paid by the Rwandan government, did a lot of awful things, and had this complete 180 turnaround to a person of life and joy. He met my mum and started working with her in this orphanage that she was working in. And they met, they became friends, they're going to church together, living with all of these kids and mentoring them. They were just friends apparently to begin with. And then God had his way, like started speaking to both of them. My dad had this crazy dream, which I will not fully go into, but it was about shoes. He woke up in the dream and knew that my mum was who he needed to marry.
That's it.
Ran to her house, told her, and the rest is history. Yeah, not the most romantic story ever. My dad couldn't even speak English really when they first met. And miraculously, without the powers of Duolingo or any of those apps, learned English. And yeah, married her.
Wasn't it like within 3 weeks he learned English or something crazy?
My dad like has an amazing story, and literally he started learning English in a dream at one point.
No way.
And then he speaks better English than me, I'd say, these days.
That is wild.
And you hear these beautiful radical stories of faith and encounter with Christ that often do happen kind of in the Eastern world. And so you've actually grown up with such a rich introduction to faith. And so I'm curious, how has your relationship with God evolved? Even talk about some of the formational aspects of it as well, because of growing up around your parents' story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would always say I had mutual friends with God when I was growing up. It was almost like, it wasn't just that I knew about him, but I watched the impact of relationship with God.
Yeah.
I love that. Mutual
on my
friends.
parents.
Mutual Facebook
And it was,
friends.
sometimes like when you have mutual friends, you feel like you know them.
Yeah.
Because you hear so much about them. You love people that love them.
Yeah.
And that's how I describe when I was a kid. And it was almost like hearing my dad's story, especially, it would be crazy. I would either have to believe that my dad was a liar and that his whole story wasn't true if God wasn't real.
Wow.
Or he was crazy.
Yeah.
Or that it was true. So honestly, I would just describe my kind of evolution of faith as like my parents introduced me to their friend, Jesus, got to see the symptoms of what life with Jesus looks like in my house. Like saw a lot of beautiful things, a lot of people freed and transformed, and like the fullness of life just kind of in my house and in my community. But it just evolved sort of just as any friendship does. The more I spent time with God, the more I got to know about him, the more time I spent with people in my community that knew him, I began to have my own friendship with him rather than it just be my parents. But where I grew up in Scotland was a super atheist kind of area. So I grew up in a house where it felt like Jesus was part of our family. Wow. And then I stepped outside the house into school, into a community, an environment where faith was completely something of the past. So that was like a really interesting
what was that like?
tension. I don't know even how to describe it. Like, it felt, say you'd seen Santa Claus in your house, like physically seen him, and you went to school and suddenly someone tells you like, that's ridiculous. Like Santa Claus is not real. That's just a story. That's almost how it felt. It was like, this is a God who has changed and saved my parents' lives. A God who I've seen like physical evidence of his existence.
Wow.
And then you're met with this reality for a lot of other people that is either completely false, it's a made up story. Some people in my school like didn't even celebrate Christmas really as a Christian thing. So it's like Jesus was just wiped from their idea of history. And so it was hard when I was growing up. Like I got in a bit of trouble at school. Around.
I heard you got kicked out of school.
Not kicked out, but like my teachers seriously spoke to my parents on one of my first weeks at school because I told a girl like, if you don't become friends with Jesus now, you're going to spend eternity without him. Like it's not going to be good for you. And I remember the teachers just saying, you can't say stuff like that to people. It's bullying. I remember my parents saying like, okay, that is true, but we're going to help her work on the delivery of that.
No way.
True.
That is so bold.
Wow.
Yeah. But that was because my dad's life was like, it was like Jesus rescued him from such darkness.
Yeah.
It felt like really urgent for other people that were not necessarily living the same sort of darkness my dad was living in. But through his story, I sort of believe, if you don't know Jesus, like, I have the answer to life in all of its fullness. Like, I didn't fully understand that when I was a kid, but the joy and like the beauty of the life that my family had and that I saw in my parents' stories was something that I thought everyone should get to experience.
Wow. And I think sometimes, we've talked about it together, the three of us, about how, in Eastern context, a lot of the time you see these radical stories of people coming to Jesus. But sometimes in our Western context, we can almost feel like there needs to be some sort of like sales funnel where it's like, oh, in order for people to meet Jesus, you need to create the perfect environment, you know, be talking about it for 3 months, almost like soft launch it to them, invite them into a space, make sure the space has the perfect elements. And then maybe, just maybe, if they're warmed to it, they will give their life to Jesus. And I suppose for you, you're in that context, but also you've grown up hearing this pretty wild story of someone who was, as you would say yourself, like the furthest from Christ. And it's still, you know, it was still made possible for him to encounter Christ. And so I suppose the urgency in that story, how has that impacted the way, as you've grown, the way that you share your faith with people in your life?
I think to begin with, when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, it really felt like it is my responsibility to share the answer to life with everyone. Like, it was a beautiful, like, exciting thing for me to do when I was a kid, but I think I definitely felt somewhat of a burden of, I kind of believe this idea of I'm gonna have like a double-decker bus that I can take to heaven, and I need to pack on everyone I know in it. And that came from a really beautiful, like, pure place, I think. But for me, my faith when I was growing up, that was kind of the only purpose of it. It was like, I knew Jesus, I was in a relationship with him. That was kind of a full stop at the end of that. And now all I needed to do was make sure everyone else could be friends with him as well. And it felt like, as I became a teenager and people began to question more of faith and life and purpose, it was like people were searching for the things that I found in Jesus. So it did literally feel like a problem-solving kind of sum that people were trying to work out, talking about, like, looking for hope in all of these different places. And I felt I had the answer to it. And because of that, I then was like, okay, I can't know anyone and not tell them that Jesus loves them and wants to be friends with them, and that's possible for them right now. I think that began as being it was like the thing that I got up in the morning and I thought about, but I think if I was honest, it would sometimes stress me out, and sometimes I'd make friends and think, okay, how quickly am I gonna tell them about Jesus? But as I grew up, especially I think when I got to uni and just, I guess, matured as a person, like matured in faith, and began to understand more of the heart of God for me and for my friends. And as people became more complex and their searching became more complex, I think beautifully, like, God removed that pressure from me, and really, like, gently reminded me that it's an honor for me to even get to play a role in someone else getting to know Jesus, that it's not on me. People's eternity is not on me, but that it actually is a gift to introduce people I love to the person I love the most.
Wow.
So that, like, that worked its way out, I think, as I left home and went to uni.
Wow, so cool. Because it can feel like a burden. And I think it's cool to see your stories, like, started kind of there with almost like a panic of like, I have to, otherwise I'm going to get to the gates and he's going to reject me or something crazy.
That's so big.
But there's freedom you found in it. And I think when you look at the life of Jesus, he was urgent, but he was never like panicked or in a hurry or rushing. Like, he was like,
he walked quite a lot.
Slowly, I can imagine. And he was mindful.
Wow. Very demure.
Very demure. Very cutesy.
I mean, Indy, I wanted to throw it to you as well, because I know for you, like, high school was a massive, like, formative experience for you. And so what was your relationship like with that pressure to have to share your faith? How did that evolve?
I can really relate to you, like, the first week of school where you're like, no, like, you're gonna go to hell. Like, please don't, like, please follow. I think, I don't know whether it's like the possible outcome of like being a church kid and like growing up, kind of having the like knowledge of sharing your faith and why we do it, but it's become like, it's before the revelation of it, where I think sometimes it can feel like a duty rather than like a joy. And I think, I really relate to that, of it slowly becoming like, oh, I'm not gonna fail him if I don't do this, and I'm not. I don't know. I had this revelation probably a few years ago, which has kind of just shifted. I'm like an Enneagram 3, which is an achiever. Oh, yeah.
No way.
So I fight for like an 8. What's an 8?
Challenge.
The really mean one, right?
Yeah,
The mean one. Oh my gosh. But 3 is
redeemed
like,
though.
Is it? Oh, come on, we'll get to that. But yeah, so it's like an achiever, and so I fight a lot for like love with what I do.
Yeah.
And that was a lot to do with my faith, and that kind of trickled into like, I have to, bring how many friends to Jesus, and I've got to do this to earn his love. And then I just had this revelation one day where I kind of was reminded that his love for me hasn't changed from the moment I was born, where I couldn't talk, I couldn't speak his name, I couldn't tell him I love him. I literally was a baby, like couldn't feed myself, couldn't do anything. He loved me the same then as he does now, after I've done what I feel like is great achievements and it's great things for him. And I've told so many people about Jesus, but his love has remained the same. And I just think it's such a cool reminder for me of just like, we don't have to strive. We don't have to panic. Like there is urgency. And I love that that's kind of where we've arrived of like, yeah, this is an urgent matter of sharing our faith, but it's also like, it's not our burden to carry. It's like, it's his burden. And, we get to just like share it together and trust him. And then you feel light and free. So I'd love to hear like what your journey was from kind of this burden you felt at school and to now, like how you're sharing your faith now and what's changed.
Yeah, so I think, as I was saying, when I got to uni, away from my family, when I was at school, people were interested in my faith, but they knew my parents. My parents are kind of crazy. We were known as the Christian wild. Like, my dad's from Africa. He's had this experience that's nice for him, but that was kind of what we carried as a family. When I went to uni, I had this decision to make of, okay, now I'm just Bonte to people, and I can be known as Bonte, who's friend of Jesus, or something else. And as what I was saying about people searching, like I got to uni and met and fell in love with all of these brilliant people from all across the world who were so clearly searching for something and looking in lots of different places, not in church, but looking like in success and in partying and drugs, all these places that often Christians run away from or kind of stand on the sidelines of. But as I fell in love with these people, like became friends with them and was in close proximity to them, I kind of realized the power of being present in those places with those people and walking Jesus into them. And a lot of what I'd learned about sharing faith in church and in all the different ministries that I was a part of was all very practical steps of, this is what you say, this is what you share with someone, this is the book that you give them.
Right.
Then you invite them to Alpha, they come to faith, they come to church, da-da-da. That stuff's all great. But I think I kind of came alive in the idea of what I was talking about with friendship, of just when you love people and are friends of them, you introduce them to your friends. And for me, as I looked at the person of Jesus, what he did and how he spent his time walking around for the few years that he was doing ministry, I just saw him and connected with him as a savior who was present, like in parties, in the exciting parts of life. Like Jesus says that he's come to give us life to the full.
Wow.
And some of those places people were searching, especially in kind of the party scene and stuff at uni, that a lot of Christians think of as being very evil and dark, and parts of it are. I experienced this real beautiful like longing from young people to be in a sweaty basement like multiple times a week, dancing, and like searching for community and kind of creativity and expression. And I just felt like this is where Jesus would be. And if I can be there with them and bring my friend Jesus there to party with them, instead of trying to drag them out of those places into church or into Alpha, I felt like that was what it could look like to share faith. So that's kind of what I did. And yeah, that burden sort of left me because it felt so fun. And it just felt like, you know, if I was to introduce Jordan to one of my friends and they said, actually, I don't really get on with Jordan, I don't want to be friends with him, I would think, like, that's really sad. Jordan's amazing, but that's okay. We don't need to hang out with Jordan. And that's what it was like. It was like, that's a
good point.
I didn't have to give anyone a book or a sermon. People, as I was in close proximity to them and in close proximity to Jesus, the two kind of came together. And that sort of like snowballed into some more like formal ways of sharing faith. In all the party stuff, I really believe like Jesus did his first miracle at a wedding party. Like that was the first thing that he chose to do as a real like declaration of his power, like miraculous power. I think he did that on purpose. So I really believe like in the party scene, there's something of the kingdom and like what would it look like to have some of that expression in the church and vice versa. So I learned how to DJ when I was at uni and felt like if I could create spaces of that same sort of life and expression party, but without the drugs and darkness, then it would be a win. So I learned to DJ and I would put on these events and parties where people would come and gather around food and music, celebrate life and community. And then I would share something about Jesus, like share a story about him, just as you would at a normal dinner party when you talk about your friends. And God was so kind, and I just got to see people who would never walk into a church or come into an Alpha course meet Jesus in this organic way that didn't feel like I was having to strive or run around or plan in my journal like my strategy of sharing Jesus with them. It just felt really natural. And it felt like God was doing all of it. I was just having fun, dancing, eating with my friends. But because he was there, the same as the wedding at Cana, that was just a wedding. But because Jesus was there, God was glorified and people came to know him and follow him. And that's what happened. Like that's what Jesus promised would happen when we partner with him. And that's what I got to see in Glasgow.
Oh, and just before we move on, Alpha is a course to explore your faith, but feel free to carry on.
Bonte, what you're touching on is super important. And I love that we started this conversation talking about the urgency that perhaps we had inherited from early experiences of church and even parents. But then we learned and we were discipled in how to channel that urgency and then meet it with being present with people. And I think when I look at the life of Jesus, you know, in Matthew 28, when it's like, go into all the world, he's like, go into the world. It wasn't bring the world to you so that so that they can experience whatever you're doing. It's like, be intentional and go out into people's worlds. And even when I look at the life of Jesus, you know, in Luke, on the road to Emmaus, there's these two disciples and they are devastated that Jesus has just died. And then Jesus appears and they don't even recognize him. But instead of correcting them, he just continues to walk with them and listen to them instead of just teaching and correcting them. And I think that urgency would have led Jesus to be with them in the room. But actually then he met them with full presence. Yeah. And so, you know, what I love for you is you grew up in this atmosphere where you learned the urgency of being able to share Jesus with people, but then you learned the power of being present. And then all of that happens in Glasgow, and then you get told you're moving to London. I want to know about that. What's the story? Why did you end up in London?
So I always kind of thought I would end up in London. I grew up in a small city and around the countryside, moved to another relatively small city. Everywhere in Scotland's kind of small. I always felt like London was where I would end up. I love culture and music and art, and I was in Glasgow for 4 years and it felt like a change was needed. And I got offered this job which is the job I'm currently doing for a kind of ministry organization called Young Life, who basically just share Jesus with young people. I never had any intention of ever working for the church, in ministry, in any job like that. I always really believed like that idea of the Great Commission, that I wanted to share Jesus with people who were nowhere near church and ministry. So it didn't make sense for me to be stuck inside the church doing that. So I got offered this job. This American guy called me and said, we'd love you to come and do some of what you've been doing in Glasgow, in London. And I pretty much said no immediately. I didn't think about it. I didn't pray about it. I said, no, I don't want to be a student worker. Like, this has been a thing for this time. And I'm passionate about sharing Jesus with my friends, my peers. I don't want to do it as a career. So I said no. And then I ended up having this amazing conversation with one of my friends who doesn't know Jesus. And she just said to me, Bonte, if what you believe is true, why would you not want to spend your time telling people about it?
Yeah.
And she kind of made it impossible for me to say no to the job.
What a friend.
She was paid by
I know, she was recruited.
That's a good mate.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a real, like,
Wow.
it was really different to what I thought I would be doing. But yeah, I graduated uni, moved to London a couple of years ago, started this job where all I was kind of told that I was meant to do was create spaces for 18 to 25-year-olds to meet Jesus.
Wow.
Which is kind of the dream, like quite crazy job. But I felt really passionately about the fact that God had begun writing a story in Glasgow that was not just for Glasgow. Like, a lot of the friends and the people that I was in community with in Glasgow who I loved, like all still my friends now, are people who, a lot of them commonly said they'd never heard the gospel before. Like, no one had ever shared this story of love and rescue and truth with them. And I really felt like that was the same type of people that I wanted to create these spaces for in London. So that's what I'm doing. It took a long time. I kind of arrived in London with that brief and just like very small me, big city, don't really know anyone, don't have any like great connections or anything. And for the first couple of months, I just walked around, like around university campuses, around areas where young people lived and prayed. And really, like, the burden of people coming to faith is like so off my shoulders. I was like, okay, God, you're going to have to do something here or inspire something in me, because without you, I have nothing. Like, I have nothing to do or share with people here. And beautifully, as he does, he kind of reminded me that the things that I was gathering people around in Glasgow, so food, music, especially like underground music, electronic music, like seeing redemption of that space, was a work that he'd begun in me that he was going to carry on. So I started gathering, like hanging out with young adults and students around like DJing, underground music, and have been like walking alongside them in community, gathering with them around the table, gathering them with them around the decks, like playing music, being together, and just really like first and foremost just creating spaces where young people in London can be in community, like sit around a table, eat a meal, talk about life in a way like that they don't have access to normally. Like, a lot of young people in London are super lonely. A lot of students that I meet go a couple of days not speaking to anyone in a week, and go to a nightclub to experience something of life, which you do in a nightclub. So just like creating those spaces, but with space for Jesus to come in and do his thing. And it's just been a really beautiful, like slow journey, the same as it was with my friends at uni. It's not like a quick fix thing of presenting the gospel to them accepting it, starting going to church, and then you just leave them. It's like those friends from uni, I'm still walking alongside them. Many of them are still figuring out who Jesus is and what that means to them. But just giving that same space for questions, for doubts, for people to ask things like, you know, it's kind of crazy that we believe in a Middle Eastern man who walked on water, like was raised from the dead. We believe in a story where there's like a talking snake in the first couple of chapters. Like, that's really weird. And just allowing people to be able to talk about that stuff and essentially just meet my friend Jesus in the same way that I've met him and some of my friends at home have met him.
Yeah, I'm like, it's really cool, but I'm curious to hear kind of like what practically, what does it look like walking into a nightclub for you now that's different to how you used to walk into a nightclub? Like, what does it look like to walk into a nightclub with your friend Jesus? What's different?
I think it's something I'm still learning. Spaces that are dark are hard to walk into. And I think when I was a kid, I used to, and even a teenager, I'd feel like, okay, it's my responsibility. Like, I go into this dark place with almost like a torch on my head and bring light into the space. And that was amazing. But when you go in alone to those spaces, you can get a bit lost in the darkness and it can be scary. But I think some of what I've learned now is the power of community in those spaces. Like, if you think about me with a head torch going into a dark room, I would have to go really up close to the darkness to bring light to it. If I was to walk in with you guys as well with a torch in your head, the more light that enters the room, the more the room kind of lights up. So I think that's been a big part of it for me, especially in this job as well. Like, humbling myself and not just thinking I'm the one to go into these places and bring Jesus to them. But like, Jesus went most places with his friends. And he always, like, he says that people will know us by our love for one another. And they'll know Jesus by our love for one another. So for us to enter into these spaces of darkness or places that we don't normally associate with God and church and holiness, to go together into those spaces and bring Jesus with us, I think has been one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. Like, it's not a journey that you have to go on alone.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's cool. And it's, I guess it's intentionality, isn't it? Like, you're walking in with a purpose.
Yeah.
And one of those purposes can just be to have fun. Like,
yeah,
I don't know, sharing your faith doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be like, it can be part of you. And I love that. And I think when you're intentional going in, knowing like, I am with like Jesus is within me. Like, I am walking in with him. I feel like it must just change how you walk in, like your confidence, your like eye contact, like it must just do something to you. Have you heard about this guy called he's a monk called Brother Lawrence? Yes,
with the dishes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And okay, so just I've heard about him recently. I'm obsessed with him. But his whole thing is basically how like you don't go from one spiritual act to another. Like, he is just like present within, so that he doesn't like leave. And basically how you can offer your like every day to him and give him glory. So his analogy he uses, not even analogy, the way he does this is he washes dishes, and as he washes his dishes, he like gives God glory and like invites him in to wash dishes with him.
Yeah.
And then like it's kind of cool because in the book he writes, he talks about like just I think it's his friends who come in, and they basically, everyone just wants to be around him when he's washing dishes, because how like the Holy Spirit is just so present when he's washing dishes. And I just
adorable.
think it's so, but I think it speaks to what you're saying, because it's so like he's washing dishes with intentionality. He's not like washing dishes and then leaving to go to church and then that's the moment. And you're not going to the nightclub and then rocking up on a Sunday morning and then that's the moment. Like, the moment is when you walk in and you recognize Jesus is within you, and there's intentionality to give him glory. Like, there's a moment where you are like, it's like an internal dialogue with him consistently, which I think is what's so cool about your story, because you do that and you go into you're working with young people, and no, it's all an offering, isn't it? It's all something to give him and bring him into, and sharing your faith is that. It's like it's a lifestyle.
Yeah,
it's not just like an act, is it? It is genuinely a lifestyle. So I love that. I think it's beautiful to, such an easy thing. We can all do that. Like we can all just remind ourselves, oh, he's within me, he's walking into this room with me, he's behind me, he's next to me, he's in front of me. And like when I walk in, because he's with me, like the atmosphere will shift.
Yeah.
And can I be present? Can I see what you're trying to do in this room? Yeah. Will I be able to be aware of it? Will I be open? Will my eyes be open to it?
Yeah.
And
Super
I love that. It's a really cool story.
And it's that shift, like, I think we grew up sometimes as Christians thinking if we go into those spaces, we're going to be brought down into something, or we're going to be the ones affected by what's going on there. And yeah, it's what you're saying of actually shifting it to, what if the atmosphere in the room changes, like the temperature of the room changes when we walk in there, because our God is more powerful and bigger than anything that people are experiencing in a nightclub. It's literally just music. So I think when that shifted for me, because I think I grew up where it was like, you have to stay away from this and stay away from this, and the holiest place you can be is in church with other Christians, and that's beautiful, but we are going to get to do that for eternity. And I think just recognizing the gift of getting to be in the world now, like the world is amazing. I think sometimes we can be scared of the world as Christians, but what the world has to offer is amazing and is a reflection of how good God is. And I think when you actually like get out of that funk and get into, it doesn't have to be a nightclub, it can be a football pitch or a shop or something, I don't know, whatever you're interested in, but those are places that God has created us to be, and they're the places where people go and find themselves and figure out who they are, and then hopefully who they're made in the image of.
It's just like proves kind of the design of God, like the design of us individuals. And like he is literally the most intentional dad. Like he has designed everything so specifically, like just down to the stuff you enjoy, like electronic music and the stuff you'll enjoy, and the spaces like you'll go in just because you love them and you find them fun is like so not by mistake. And I love it. Like it doesn't have to be, you don't have to like look at someone and be like, great, that's what I'm going to do because that's what it looks like to do that. But, and to share my faith, and actually like that we are so unique and it's so for a reason. I know that's like such a blanket, like probably something is so obvious to us, but
no, it's good.
It still blows my mind that like he's using the like desires that you have to enjoy electronic music. And yeah, he uses it all, doesn't he? Sorry.
Wow.
Continue on.
I mean, I think both of you are pointing to such an amazing, valuable reminder of just how involved God is in our day-to-day and the normalities of our life. And I think something I've struggled with in my own story is sometimes feeling like, let's just go disqualified, or feeling like I'm not doing something extravagant enough to be able to be used by God. And I think I would almost pose that to you, Bonte, and just go, from everything that you've learned in your life, what would you say to someone who feels disqualified from being able to share their faith in their day-to-day life?
I think it's just reminding yourself of some of this like simplicity of what we've been talking about, of firstly, we don't have to have any qualifications. Like Jesus says to all of us, like we're invited into sharing him and his story with the world. Like if you look at the disciples that he was giving the Great Commission to, if you look at qualifications, like they didn't have any.
Wow.
A lot of them had failed. Some of them had betrayed Jesus. Some of them walked with him for years and didn't understand who he was. But he invites them into this journey of spreading Jesus throughout the world. So I think that's like the thing to ground yourself in, that reminder, like Matthew 28, the Great Commission, that's for us. But also that same idea of how creative and specific God is with how he's made us. God has made you in a unique way, with unique passions and things to share. And sometimes those will be the spaces where you get to share Jesus. And for some people, that will be from within the church or from a stage or from a ministry. And for some people, that will be in their home with their family. And I think instead of thinking of it as having to share like your whole faith or share like a whole story or with any strategy, for me, just that idea of sharing my friend with my other friends.
Very good.
I don't know anyone who doesn't have a friend that they've told one of the other friends about or said, Jordan, I really want you to meet Indy. You guys would get on really well. And for me, that's been the most freeing part of sharing my faith, is just,
wow.
Even when it's not me actively sharing, my friends seeing, oh, this Jesus guy has a big impact on your life, or like seems to bring this and this and this and joy and peace into your life. Tell me about him. And like people's passions come out of them, I think. And passion and stories, like these are the things that we as humans love to gather around and hear about. I think that would be my encouragement, that you don't have to have any fancy words, or often some of the most beautiful times for me of sharing faith haven't required many words. And it's been like more of just a sharing of life. And to me, like Jesus is life, and like the one who created life. So you kind of just share him in the way you breathe and walk alongside people.
Wow. Unbelievable. Man, such an incredible story. And thank you so much for sharing with us. I feel so impacted by it. And I don't know, just amped up to go and share my faith. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to that conversation. Really hope you enjoyed it and learned a thing or two from Bonte's wisdom.
Yeah, please let us know if anything spoke to you about what Bonte said. We would love to hear your story and the things that impacted you. So let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye.